What if Israel's attack on Iran was prophesied 2,600 years ago? What if the prophet Ezekiel saw Operation Rising Lion in a divine vision? What if this isn't just breaking news, it's biblical prophecy unfolding before your very eyes? In the next 25 minutes, you'll discover the hidden mystery that changes everything. If you're like millions of believers watching these headlines and wondering, is this just another Middle East conflict or something prophetically deeper? Feeling confused by world chaos without spiritual context? You're about to understand why Ezekiel 38 is the key to everything happening right now. Here's what's happening at this very moment that the mainstream media won't tell you the full truth about. Israel has launched Operation Rising Lion, the largest and most devastating military strike on Iran in history. Over 200 fighter jets crossed into Iranian airspace, targeting nuclear facilities in Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow. This isn't just another surgical strike. This is total warfare. The casualties are staggering. Revolutionary Guard commanders eliminated, nuclear centrifuges destroyed, Iran's nuclear program set back by decades. But Iran didn't just sit there and take it. Within hours, Iran launched Operation True Promise, a massive retaliation with ballistic missiles targeting Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Air raid sirens wailed as families ran for bomb shelters. The Iron Dome intercepted most missiles, but several got through. The global implications are immediate and terrifying. Oil prices have surged past $150 per barrel. Stock markets are crashing worldwide. President Trump has called for the immediate evacuation of Tehran, declaring America will truly solve Iran's nuclear program once and for all. Russia is moving naval assets to the Mediterranean. Turkey is calling for an emergency Islamic summit. The entire world is watching as two ancient enemies clash in what could become World War III. But here's what CNN, BBC, and Fox News won't tell you about what's really happening behind these headlines. This isn't just breaking news. This isn't just geopolitics. This isn't even just about nuclear weapons. This is the fulfillment of a 2,600-year-old biblical prophecy that most Christians have never understood. And when you see the connection, it will change how you view every headline for the rest of your life. Because what we're watching isn't random violence. It's the precise unfolding of God's prophetic plan that was written down centuries before Christ was born. 2,600 years ago, in the ancient city of Babylon, a Hebrew priest named Ezekiel received one of the most detailed and precise prophecies in all of Scripture. God pulled back the veil of time and showed him a future war that would leave the entire world in shock. In Ezekiel chapter 38, God reveals a massive coalition of nations that will attack Israel in the latter days. And here's what will absolutely blow your mind. Persia is specifically named as the leader of this alliance, not symbolically, not metaphorically. The Hebrew text literally says Paraz, the ancient name for Persia, which is the exact territory of modern-day Iran. Listen carefully to what God told Ezekiel. Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya will be with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Think about this for a moment. Ezekiel lived 6 centuries before Christ. The United States didn't exist. Modern Israel didn't exist. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as we know it today, didn't exist. Yet God showed Ezekiel the exact nations that would align against Israel in the end times. But here's where it gets even more incredible. Ezekiel describes this invasion coming from the north. Pull up a map right now and look. Iran sits directly north of Israel. The missiles we saw flying toward Tel Aviv and Jerusalem yesterday followed the exact trajectory Ezekiel prophesied 26 centuries ago. The prophet saw horses and chariots in his vision because that's all he could relate to in his ancient world. But what if those horses were actually tanks rolling across the desert? What if those chariots were fighter jets screaming through the sky? What if Ezekiel was seeing modern warfare through ancient eyes? God told Ezekiel this would happen in the latter days, when Israel would be gathered out of many nations and dwelling safely in the land. Israel became a nation again in 1948 after being scattered for nearly 2,000 years. Check. They're dwelling in their ancient homeland today. Check. Every single piece of this prophetic puzzle is falling into place with mathematical precision that defies coincidence. But here's what most people don't understand about this prophecy. It's not just about politics or territory or nuclear weapons. This is spiritual warfare playing out on the world stage. The same demonic forces that opposed God's people in Ezekiel's day are still operating today through the same geographical region. And that's where the mystery gets even deeper. Because there's an ancient spiritual entity specifically assigned to Persia that the prophet Daniel encountered 2,500 years ago. This territorial spirit has been opposing God's purposes through that region for millennia, and it's still operating through modern Iran today. The Bible calls this entity the Prince of Persia. And understanding this spiritual dimension is the key to comprehending what's really happening in the Middle East right now. But here's what will absolutely shock you about Iran's spiritual history. The same demonic entity that's driving Iran's hatred for Israel today was identified by name in the Bible 2,500 years ago. In Daniel chapter 10, we get a rare glimpse behind the veil of what's really happening in the spiritual realm. Daniel had been praying and fasting for 21 days when an angel finally appeared to him. But here's the stunning part. The angel explained he had been delayed because he was fighting the Prince of Persia. This wasn't a human ruler. This was a powerful territorial spirit assigned specifically to the region we now call Iran. For 3 weeks, this demonic entity battled against God's messenger, trying to prevent divine revelation from reaching Daniel. Think about the implications. The same spiritual force that resisted God's purposes in ancient Persia is still operating through modern Iran today. Same geography, same demonic opposition, same target, God's covenant people. But here's where the mystery becomes even more fascinating. Persia has the most complex relationship with Israel in all of biblical history. Most people today see Iran as Israel's greatest enemy, but that wasn't always the case. Let me take you back to 539 BC. The Jewish people had been in Babylonian captivity for 70 years. Their temple was destroyed. Their city was in ruins. Their hope was nearly gone. Then something miraculous happened. A Persian king named Cyrus conquered Babylon and did something no conqueror had ever done before. He freed the Jewish captives and paid for them to return home and rebuild their temple. But here's the absolutely mind-blowing part. God called this pagan Persian king, my anointed one. In Isaiah chapter 45, verse 1, God literally calls Cyrus his Messiah, the same Hebrew word used for the coming Christ. A Persian ruler from the exact same region that is Iran today was chosen by God to restore Israel. The same geographical territory that now threatens to destroy Israel once saved Israel. This isn't coincidence. This is the same spiritual battlefield, but the forces have completely flipped. What changed? The territorial spirit that Daniel encountered, the Prince of Persia, has gained complete control over that region. The angel told Daniel that after defeating the Prince of Persia, he would have to fight the Prince of Greece. These aren't symbolic references. These are literal territorial spirits assigned to specific geographical regions, influencing the governments and peoples of those areas. And here's what gives me hope in all of this. The same God who broke through demonic resistance in Daniel's time and used Cyrus to restore Israel is still sovereign over Persia today. The same God who defeated the Prince of Persia once can defeat him again. Right now, as Iran's government wages war against Israel, something miraculous is happening beneath the surface that most people don't know about. Look at what's happening in the world today and tell me this isn't exactly what Ezekiel saw 2,600 years ago. Ezekiel chapter 38 lists the specific nations that will join Persia in this end-times coalition against Israel. Let me read them to you. Gog of the land of Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, Gomer, and Beth Togarmah. Now watch this. Biblical scholars have traced these ancient names to their modern locations. Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, that's modern-day Russia. Gomer and Beth Togarmah, that's Turkey. Ethiopia and Libya, that's North Africa. So according to Ezekiel, the end-times alliance against Israel will include Russia, Turkey, Iran, and North African nations. Does that sound familiar? Let me show you what's happening right now that should make every believer's hair stand on end. Russia and Iran have formed the closest military partnership in decades. Russian weapons are flowing into Iran. Iranian drones are being used in Ukraine. Putin and Iran's supreme leader are coordinating their strategies against the West like never before. Turkey, once America's NATO ally, has completely shifted its allegiance. President Erdogan openly supports Hamas and condemns Israel at every opportunity. Turkey is building closer ties with both Russia and Iran every single month, just as Ezekiel predicted. The Abraham Accords tried to bring peace to the Middle East, but they've actually accelerated this prophetic alignment. As Israel makes peace with some Arab nations, it's driving Iran, Turkey, and Russia closer together in opposition. But here's what most people miss about this prophecy. Ezekiel says this coalition will come against Israel like a storm and like a cloud covering the land. That's not describing a conventional war between armies. That's describing overwhelming force from multiple directions simultaneously. Look at Iran's proxy network today. Hezbollah in Lebanon with over 100,000 missiles pointed directly at Israel. Hamas in Gaza. The Houthis in Yemen launching missiles at Israeli ships. Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq. Iran has literally surrounded Israel with weapons, just waiting for the signal. And now, with Israel's preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, that signal might have just been given. Russia is already moving naval assets to the Mediterranean. Turkey is calling for an emergency Islamic summit. North African nations are condemning Israel's actions. The pieces of Ezekiel's puzzle are clicking into place with terrifying precision. But here's the part that should give every believer tremendous hope. Ezekiel doesn't end this prophecy with Israel's destruction. God himself steps into this battle in a way the world has never seen before. But here's where Ezekiel's prophecy becomes absolutely mind-blowing. God doesn't just watch this massive coalition attack Israel, he steps into the battle himself in the most supernatural way imaginable. Listen to what God promises in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 19. Surely in that day there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, so that the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that creep on the earth, and all men who are on the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. God is going to shake the entire earth. Every living creature will tremble at his presence. But that's just the beginning of this supernatural intervention. Verse 21 says God will call for a sword against Gog throughout all his mountains. Every man's sword will be against his brother. The attacking armies will turn on each other in supernatural confusion, just like what happened to Israel's enemies throughout biblical history. Then comes verse 22, and this is where it gets absolutely incredible. And I will bring him to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed. I will rain down on him, on his troops, and on the many peoples who are with him, flooding rain, great hailstones, fire and brimstone. Fire and brimstone from heaven. Hailstones so massive they crush entire armies. Flooding rain that turns battlefields into muddy graves. This isn't conventional warfare. This is divine intervention on a scale the world has never witnessed since the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. But here's the most important part of this entire prophecy. God tells us exactly why he's going to intervene this way. Verse 23. Thus, I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord. This battle isn't ultimately about Israel's survival, though God will certainly protect them. This battle is about God revealing His glory to a world that has forgotten Him. When the dust settles and the smoke clears, every nation on earth will know that the God of Israel is the one true God. Think about what this means for today's conflict. Iran may have ballistic missiles. Russia may have nuclear weapons. Turkey may have strategic positioning. But they're not fighting against Israel alone. They're fighting against the God who created the universe, who controls the weather, who commands the angels. And that's a battle they absolutely cannot win. The prophet Zechariah gives us even more detail about this divine intervention. He says God will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling and a burdensome stone for all nations. Any nation that tries to move Jerusalem will be cut in pieces. Israel's victory won't come from superior military technology or international alliances. It will come from supernatural intervention that leaves absolutely no doubt about who delivered them. The world will witness the power of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in ways that will change everything. But there's something even more amazing happening right now that most people don't know about. But here's the hope that most people miss in all of this prophecy: God's heart for the Iranian people themselves. While Iran's government threatens Israel with destruction, something absolutely miraculous is happening beneath the surface. Iran has become home to one of the fastest-growing underground church movements in the entire world. The prophet Jeremiah gives us a stunning promise about this very region. In Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 39, God declares, "But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring back the captives of Elam." Elam was the ancient name for the region that includes much of modern Iran. God promises to restore the fortunes of Elam in the last days. And that restoration is happening right now, even as their government wages war against God's chosen people. Millions of Iranians are having supernatural dreams and visions of Jesus Christ. House churches are multiplying in secret across the country. Former Muslims are risking their lives to follow the Jewish Messiah. The same soil that produces hatred for Israel is also producing worshippers of Israel's God. Iranian believers are paying an incredible price for their faith. They face imprisonment, torture, and even death for converting to Christianity. Yet they continue to gather in homes, basements, and hidden locations to worship the Prince of Peace while their leaders prepare for war. One Iranian pastor recently said that persecution has only accelerated church growth. He explained that when the government tries to stop the gospel, God opens more hearts. Every arrest leads to more conversions. Every threat creates more boldness. This is exactly what happened in the early church. The more Rome persecuted Christians, the faster Christianity spread. The blood of martyrs became the seed of the church, and it's happening again in Iran today. Think about the incredible irony. Iran's supreme leader calls Israel the little Satan, and America the great Satan. But in the privacy of their homes, millions of Iranians are praying to the God of Israel and reading the Bible in secret. God is preparing a harvest in Iran even as their government prepares for war. When Ezekiel's prophecy is fulfilled and God supernaturally defeats this coalition, imagine how many Iranians will recognize that the God of Israel is the true God. The same divine intervention that protects Israel will also open Iranian hearts to the gospel on a massive scale. What Satan means for evil, God will use for the greatest spiritual awakening in Iranian history. This is why we don't pray for Iran's destruction. We pray for Iran's salvation. So what does all of this mean for you and me today? What does it mean for your family, your church, your community? First, this isn't about fear, it's about faith. When Jesus described the signs of the end times in Matthew chapter 24, He didn't tell His disciples to panic. He told them to look up because your redemption draws near. We're not watching random violence unfold. We're watching God's plan come to pass exactly as He promised. This means we need to shift our perspective completely. When you see headlines about Iran and Israel, don't just see politics. See prophecy. When you watch the news about Middle East tensions, remember that behind every earthly conflict is a spiritual battle that God has already won. But here's what this requires from us as believers. We need to be spiritually prepared and alert. Just as Israel was described as dwelling safely when this attack comes, we cannot let comfort lead to spiritual complacency. We must steward our spiritual lives with vigilance, prayer, Bible study, fellowship, because we are living in prophetic times. Second, we need to represent God's holiness in this dark world. As God defends His name through supernatural intervention, we are called to reflect His character in how we live, work, and relate to others. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every social media post is an opportunity to glorify the God whose name we bear. Third, we must pray strategically and specifically. Pray for Israel's protection, knowing that God has promised to defend them. Pray for Iran's underground church, that this persecution would lead to the greatest spiritual awakening in their history. Pray for your own spiritual preparation, that you would be ready for whatever God allows in these last days. Fourth, share the gospel boldly. God's ultimate desire in all of this is that the nations will know that I am the Lord. When the world sees God's supernatural intervention on behalf of Israel, it will create the greatest evangelistic opportunity in human history. Are you ready to explain to your neighbors why these things are happening? Are you prepared to point them to the God who controls all nations and all history? Finally, trust in God's sovereignty completely. No matter how overwhelming the headlines become, remember that God is in absolute control. He knows every political move before it happens. He sees the end from the beginning. And He has promised that His people are secure in Him no matter what storms may come. The same God who used Cyrus to restore Israel can use anyone for His purposes today. The same God who protected Daniel in the lion's den will protect His people in these last days. The same God who raised Jesus from the dead has the power to intervene supernaturally in world events. This is not the time for fear. This is the time for faith. This is not the time to retreat. This is the time to advance the kingdom of God. This is not the time to be silent. This is the time to boldly proclaim that our God reigns over all the earth. Because when the dust settles and the smoke clears from this prophetic conflict, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And we get to be part of that glorious victory.